All right. You want to start? I'll start.
Sure.
Hey, welcome, America, to Goodnight America. Today's guest is Dr. Paul Offit, who is the most hated doctor in the history of medicine. Paul, it's very nice of you to take time out of your day from giving kids autism to show up on my dumb little show, so I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for that kind introduction.
Hey, listen, anytime. I just said this off the air. I am exhausted for you. Can I just, seriously, what the fuck? What the fuck is going on? What happened?
What happened is the world has turned upside down. We've been invaded by a foreign country who has decided to take over the government and completely destroy the public health system in this country. That's what's happened.
The public health system, all kinds, democracy, all kinds of system. This is wild too, because you and RFK Jr. have been going at it for a long time. This is like your nemesis got complete control. How does that happen?
Well, he has the upper hand. I think the name Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a little more famous than mine. His father was Attorney General of the United States, ran for president. My father sold men's shirts. So maybe that's the difference.
Okay, I want to give a quick bio on you because this is fascinating. Given the vitriol that is shot in your direction, you were the son of a shirt maker, yes?
Yes.
Sometimes you would work with him and you'd see salespeople come in and you go, I don't like the pomp and circumstance of the sales industry. I'm going to go into science. Okay, so that's good. Then you have club foot surgery. Is that correct? And then you're sent to the polio ward where you see children suffering from polio and you go, holy shit, I don't want to ever see this again. I'm going to get into medicine. Then you you marry a pediatrician, which is good. And you co-found the rotavirus vaccine, which saves something 2,000 babies a day. Is that the number? Something like 600,000 children a year.
Well, it were to be given to everybody in the world, it would save about 500,000 lives a year. It unfortunately doesn't get to everybody in the developing world, but because of Bill and Melinda Gates, it gets to a lot of people. It probably saves about 165,000 lives a year, roughly.
Okay. So this is who you are. This is your bio. I don't think anybody can refute any of these facts. Yet you're a piece of shit for you're profiting off misery and you're giving people autism. How does that? I got to tell you, as far as evil backstories go, not a lot of villains have yours. So what's going? Do you understand this at all?
Yeah, I think what happened. So I grew up in the world of science. I mean, I spent 25 years in a windowless concrete block room inoculating mice, which usually keeps you below radar.
Right.
But I think what happened was when I saw this, that the anti-vaccine activists were putting out misinformation that was causing parents not to vaccinate their children, that was causing children to come into our hospital to suffer and occasionally die. I mean, I stepped up. So I think what I did that was different is that instead of just saying, look, here are biological data showing that, for example, vaccines don't cause autism and leave it at that, I named names. When I wrote books like Autism's False Prophets or Deadly Choices, I named names. I mean, I went behind the scenes and looked harder at people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or Del Bigtree or Barbara Fisher, and just and when you do that, when you start to name names, then it's really not science anymore. It's politics, and politics is dirty and mean and personal.
Okay, but I will say, so when you wrote Autism's False Prophets, you wrote this book and then you donated all the royalties to the Center for Autism Research at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. This is, again, something altruistic that you have done. Why are you, okay, you named names, but you're also ostensibly on the side of good in science. So why is it even a thing that you would be painted in this light? Is it strictly political? And why medicine and politics is intermingling these days is sort of weird, because rotavirus comes out, the vaccine, it's cool, it's not politicized, it drops, it saves lives, and you move on. That's kind of it. Or correct me if I'm wrong, was that a problem? Were you called murderous and greedy off of that vaccine?
No, I think what happens is the minute you say vaccines don't cause autism, and here's the evidence that they don't, you now are put yourself in the line of fire of anti-vaccine activists. They it's in their mind, it does. And therefore, the only reason you could possibly say it is that you're paid to say it, even though that's not true, obviously. I mean, it's not like me and my coworkers worked on trying to develop a rotavirus vaccine so that we could, lie about whether vaccines cause autism. It's right. Those two things are unrelated. But I think it's just the instant, it's like a tick. I mean, if you look at RFK Jr., for example, when he testified in front of that Senate confirmation hearing, the second one, in front of the Help Committee, when Bernie Sanders said, you have to admit that vaccines don't cause autism, he immediately said, well, you're just in the pocket of Big Pharma. You just get all this money from Big Pharma. Because to him, that's the explanation. And I think it is the explanation to him. I really don't think he's paid to say this, although he is paid to say it. I think that he believes it. I really think he believes it. I mean, if you look, for example, at whether or not MMR causes autism, measles, mumps, rubella vaccine causes autism, a notion that was brought up in 1998, there have been 24 separate studies looking at that in 7 countries on 3 continents involving tens of thousands of children. And they all found the same thing, right? You're not any more likely to develop autism if you got the vaccine or if you didn't. So there's 2 ways to interpret that. One, the reason researchers didn't find that MMR caused autism was because it doesn't. Yeah. Or there's RFK Jr.'s way, which is a vast international conspiracy that's driven by Big Pharma that pays off these researchers and pays off these academics and pays off these pediatricians and government officials to hide the truth. He really believes that. That's what's so frightening.
Okay, let's... There's a lot to talk about here. One of the things that, I'm exhausted for you. Anytime you appear on YouTube or, I read the comments under something you've written, even on Substack, even on your place to write your shit, people come and I can't even, more than half seem to absolutely hate you, but I can't make sense of there seems to be no through line. There's a million different reasons why they can't stand you and think you're a quack and a hack. And it's bizarre. So I understand the autism thing. Okay. But then when the COVID vaccine came out, nobody was saying it was going to cause autism, but they're saying it's ineffective, or, you're in it for the money, or they're implanting chips, or it's mind control, or they're going to sterilize people. So it's not even just purely autism in children. It's also just being wary of vaccines to begin with, which seems so conceptually bizarre because the people that are writing this shit in the comment section aren't dead of measles, mumps, rubella. They're not paralyzed by polio. Why the hatred for vaccines in general? Because they'll just throw shit against the wall and hope it sticks. Autism and other stuff. Why?
First of all, I never read the comments.
Okay, I was going to say that because that is so soul crushing.
I believe you. I trust that you're saying, because I think it would just frustrate me. So I just never, ever look at the comments. For those of you who are writing negative comments, realize I never look. I think what happened during COVID was we really did lose trust of the American public, not just a fringe group. I think we lost trust for a couple of reasons. I think one, in 2020, before we had anything, right? You have a virus that comes into this country probably around January 2020, starts killing people around February. Now you're getting hundreds of deaths a day, sometimes thousands of deaths a day, but we didn't have anything. We didn't have monoclonals till October. We didn't have antivirals till November. We didn't have vaccines till December. So we didn't have anything until the end of that year. All we could do was try and decrease human-to-human contact for a virus that spread asymptomatically and was killing people. So what did we do? We restricted travel. We closed schools. We shuttered businesses. We masked, isolated, social distance, tested, and that people saw that as massive government overreach. And then the following year, when we had a vaccine, which we had by December of 2020, you had to get a vaccine. You were mandated to get a vaccine, which meant that you couldn't go to your favorite bar or restaurant or place of worship or sporting event. And people were fired. People were fired because they didn't get a vaccine. And some people unfairly. I mean, I think people argued, look, I was naturally infected. Why do I have to get a vaccine? Fair enough. I think they shouldn't have had to get a vaccine. I think natural infection should have counted as a vaccination. But in any case, that too was seen as massive government overreach. And it's just sort of spilled over to all vaccines. I think there's always been an anti-vaccine movement ever since the smallpox vaccine, like in the late 1700s. But I think this really put it on steroids.
You had a guy, though, in office who famously, prior to COVID, was anti-vaccine and then seemed to be in the beginning of it. But then Operation Warp Speed became a champion of vaccines and took credit for the whole thing. And now he's right back to where he was before. That's got to be a little frustrating too, isn't it? Especially for your detractors, because they have to do mental gymnastics to keep up with what they should think because they're being told what they should think.
You're talking about Peter Marks.
Oh, well, Trump as well.
Oh, I see what you're saying. No, you're right. I mean, Operation Warp Speed was a production program that was put in place by the Trump administration, where they basically spent $11 billion to bet on 6 horses to win 1 race, the horses being pharmaceutical companies. That was a major effort. I mean, I think it was one of the greatest scientific or medical achievements in my lifetime. I mean, this was an unusual virus, SARS-CoV-2. It had unusual biological characteristics, clinical characteristics, and we had never used mRNA to make a vaccine before. Amazing. It was an amazing effort. And so Trump administration, Trump could have put his name on it. He could have called it the Trump vaccine, but I think at his heart, he's a deeply modest man who doesn't like to put his name on things. That's my sense of it, but I could be wrong. So you would think he would, if anybody really helped with that vaccine, it was the Trump administration. But nonetheless, this was definitely a Republican phenomenon, which is interesting because that never used to be true. I mean, the anti-vaccine activity was never a political issue. On the left, it was sort of the all-natural crowd. On the right, it was the libertarian crowd. But it's become the libertarian crowd.
Yeah, it's sort of weird that the ultra-left fringe hippie left movement was anti-vaccine and the ultra-right fringe movement is anti-vaccine. They've sort of met. It's kind of beautiful. If we could just do that with everything, just in the direction of good, that would be fantastic. Okay, so let's just say that MMR causes autism. Where's the money? Like, okay, so flat earthers, I don't understand. Okay, so it's a global conspiracy to convince us that the earth is round. Why? Is there money involved in this somehow, or they just love lying to us? With autism, is there money involved because everything, it looks like the vaccine is low profit, there's highly regulated, there just seems to be not a lot there to benefit in terms of profit right off the bat. And then it's not as if every autistic kid is on a specific medication that you can charge a lot for. Why would, if MMR causes autism, why do we keep doing it?
No, so I think you're right. It's, I mean, big pharma is a pejorative term, and it's not like it's not well earned. I mean, there's certainly pharmaceutical companies have acted unethically and aggressively and even illegally. I think the opioid epidemic is a perfect example of pharmaceutical companies acting illegally to really kill people. And so therefore, everybody sort of tarnishes big pharma with the same brush. But it's not like everything they do is illicit. The thing is there were 27 companies that made vaccines in 1955. By the beginning of the 80s, in 1980, there were 18 companies that made vaccines. By the end of the 1980s, there were 4. And the reason that companies abandoned it is it's just not something that makes a lot of money. I mean, as compared to these other products. I mean, vaccines are something you give once or a few times in a lifetime. They're never compare with like lipid lowering agents or neurological drugs or psychiatric drugs or other products. So therefore it's a fragile market. And what happened in the 80s when there was all these lawsuits, companies said, all right, forget it. We're out. It's not worth it to us. And that's where the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program was born, to at least protect them to some extent from frivolous litigation. But it's a fragile industry. I mean, make it expensive enough and they'll bail.
It's frustrating. Not that I want to be on the side of big pharma, but they have fucked themselves between the opioid crisis and insulin price gouging and over prescriptions. And then listen, this hard numbers. We spend the most per capita on healthcare, about $12,742. We're 31st out of 38 in life expectancy, 33rd out of 30 in infant mortality. We're 24th in happiness, and we're first in obesity. So we're paying Lamborghini prices, and we're getting Kia, outcomes. But a lot of these is also like we eat like idiots. RFK is right about some things. We are a big fat nation. We should probably stop, doing that. But every time I go to my doctor, he's not putting me on new shit. He says, stop eating like a moron and work out. So there is a little bit of personal responsibility in here. And if you ever have a heart attack, at no point you're like, all right, before you start, what are you going to give me? You just trust, you default to the professional and go, you do what you're going to do and just make sure I'm alive at the end. It only seems to be things like vaccines that we get very interested in the science,
Yeah, I mean, well, so vaccines are given to healthy people, including healthy children. And so they have to be held to a very high standard of safety. And they're not absolutely safe. I mean, sometimes some vaccines cause serious effects. I mean, the best example for me is the oral polio vaccine, which we use in this country from the early 1960s up until really 2000. And then we eliminated polio with that vaccine. By 1979, there was no more polio. But every year, there were children who got polio from the polio vaccine. I mean, it was a rare real side effect. So throughout the 1980s, throughout the 1990s, 8 to 10 children would get polio from the polio vaccine, which was unconscionable because there was another vaccine, which was the Salk vaccine, the inactivated vaccine, the vaccine that Scandinavian countries solely used to eliminate polio from their country. So when I came on the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices to the CDC in 1998, I asked to head the polio working group because I wanted to get us away away from the oral polio vaccine, which we did by the year 2000. But that was another example where sort of the risks of a vaccine outweighed its benefits, yet we still were using it.
Here's the thing too, like I acknowledge I'm a moron, but again, I tend to default towards expertise, which I think most people do, but you're very diplomatic when you talk about COVID vaccine, for example. You say there was a 800-page study talking about the efficacy of the potential vaccines. And you tread lightly when you say, well, you kind of have to know what they're saying in order to understand these 800 pages. And I think this is two things. First of all, nobody read the 800 pages except for professionals like you. The second thing is, even if they did, they wouldn't understand it because they don't have degrees. So like you have a lot of Dunning-Kruger affected morons, I think, pretending to know what you know. And that must be very frustrating. I know you don't read the comments, but you go on shows. I mean, you've been attacked. You've had death threats. People threaten your children. You've been physically assaulted. And these are people I don't think that have degrees and know what they're reading. That's got to be a frustrating element of all this too, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, it's so the way that worked was when in December 10th of 2020, when Pfizer submitted data to the Food and Drug Administration. So there's two documents you get. You get a 200-page document from the company, the so-called emergency use authorization form. And then you get 200 pages from the FDA, who review every piece of data from that company to make sure there's no omissions or misrepresentation. So you're reading 400 pages per vaccine. And you read it because your heart's in your throat, because you know you're about to make, in this case, an authorization or not for a vaccine that's been tested in the Pfizer case, 20,000 people. And you're making a recommendation for hundreds of millions of people. You know the other shoe is going to drop. You know that there is going to be a rare side effect. The only question is how rare and how serious, because that's always true, because there's always a human price to pay for knowledge. And the same thing with the, a week later with the Moderna vaccine, another 400 pages. So I read all 800 pages, but the hard thing is, and I'd love your feedback on this, because I don't know how to express this. I mean, I think I can read it in part because I have a background in virology and immunology and microbiology and statistics and epidemiology. So I think I can understand the 800 pages I'm reading. And not everybody can. I mean, when people say to me, I've done my research and I am not going to get this vaccine, what do they mean when they say research? Generally, they mean looking on the internet and reading other people's opinions about the vaccine. That's what they mean. They don't mean looking at all the primary studies. When the chickenpox vaccine came out in 1995, people would call me and say, I've done my research and I'm not getting that vaccine. Well, if you want to do your research, you should have read the roughly 300 papers that were out there on chickenpox. And for the most part, the advisory committees, whether it's the advisory committee to the FDA or the CDC, are composed of experts who have collectively read those papers. And so they can make an informed choice. But sell that. Trust us, we're experts. Forget it. Everybody's an expert. So that's the frustration of the modern day.
Yeah, it's like the medical community needs better PR. But part of it too is like, you're in order to get to where you are, you have to be extraordinarily smart and balanced. And you can't just say, listen, asshole, I saved 2,000 fucking babies a day. How many babies? Shut the fuck up. Like, you have done it. It's as if, somebody says Tom Brady sucks. Tom Brady has 7 rings. There's no way he sucks. That's such a stupid thing to say. And that's the same thing in your case. You've saved millions and millions and millions of people, or you will, long past you're dead because of this shit that you've done. These people have done nothing. They haven't read what you've read. They haven't done what you've done. But because of they're stupid, they think they're on par, which is, God, I don't know. I don't know what you do. How do you deal with dumb people? Is there a dumb vaccine? This is what you need to do. Make a vaccine for idiocy. Think you can do that?
That would be great. All for it.
They wouldn't take it. They think it causes autism. All right, listen. So normally in this show, like I mentioned off air, I'd bring up articles about, RFK and vaccines and measles that other people have written. But why do that? Because you are semi-prolific on your Substack. So I just want to talk about your recent articles that you should be familiar with, I would imagine, since you wrote them. Can you, this one just came out, and yet it still moves. Can you relay the story of Galileo here?
Right. So this is one thing that's somewhat heartening. So Galileo, who was the father of observational astronomy, and described things like the phases of Venus and rings around Saturn and moons of Jupiter. He was really the first to do all that. But he also bought into Nicholas Copernicus's notion that the Earth revolved around the sun, that the Earth wasn't, as stated in biblical scripture, the center of the firmament. And that was against the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church. You couldn't say that. You couldn't embrace what Nicholas Copernicus had said. You couldn't do that. But Galileo did. In a second treatise that he'd written, he did. And so for that, he was brought up in front of the Roman Catholic tribunal and censured and put in chains and carried away. And although this story is probably completely apocryphal, I love it because he said, presumably in Italian and regarding the earth, and yet he said, it still moves. I mean, you can put me in chains, but that doesn't change the fact that the earth still revolves around the sun. And that's where I feel we are now. I mean, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has now taken over public health, and he has a fixed, immutable, science-resistant belief system that, in part, vaccines cause autism. And he is going to, no doubt, rig the system and try and put in some fringe scientists who will support that belief by doing the kind of crappy studies that he held up in front of the second confirmation hearing, this study by Mawson, which he said, here's a quality study that shows vaccines cause autism. Wasn't peer reviewed, wasn't published in a scientific journal, wasn't published in a medical journal, was supported by anti-vaccine activists, was critically flawed to the point that it was just incomprehensible. And nonetheless, this was his quality study, which you can read. Many people have taken apart that study in a variety of other Substacks. But so it wasn't a quality study at all. That's why it wasn't published. Nonetheless, that's his quality study. Do I think that he's going to put in place people like David Geyer, which he's already done, who's another fringe scientist whose work was castigated by the Institute of Medicine, again, for being uninterpretable because it was so methodologically flawed. So that's what you're about to see. I think you were about to see the kinds of stories where, I've looked behind the curtain at the FDA and looked behind the curtain at the CDC. And you know what I found? I found data that showed vaccines did cause autism, and they were suppressing it. And here are those data. And it's going to drip out, drip by drip, and the media is probably going to buy it to some extent. And all it's going to do is scare people more and cause them to be even more afraid of vaccines. And he's no doubt is going to find sycophants and congressmen and other hangers on in the media who will support it. But that doesn't change the fact that vaccines doesn't cause autism, and the censoring by Galileo didn't change the fact that the earth still revolves around the sun. So that's what I hang on to. And the science doesn't change, even though those who are purporting to represent the science might.
So I love what you've done here. You have a paragraph with all the crazy shit that he said. Not all the crazy shit, but some highlights. So vaccines cause autism. No vaccine is safe and effective. That's in quotes. Polio vaccine killed many, many, many more people than it saved. The COVID-19 vaccine was the deadliest vaccine ever. The SARS-CoV-2 was ethnically targeted to spare Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese. Blacks should receive a different vaccine schedule because their immune system is better than ours. That, again, in quotes. Unpasteurized milk is safe. HIV doesn't cause AIDS. I forgot about this one. He's a HIV denier. That's a thing. I thought we closed the book on that. The measles outbreak in Samoa was caused by a defective measles vaccine. The Spanish flu of pandemic of 1918 was caused by the influenza vaccine, which wasn't invented until the 40s. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because he's in charge and his sycophants are just going to believe whatever he says. That's horrifying. This guy's in charge.
I think the thing that people don't realize about RFK Jr. is he means it. And here's why. If you read his book, and I don't recommend this, but he wrote a book called The Real Anthony Fauci. So just read pages 285 to 288, which is a section called Miasma versus Germ Theory. So the miasma theory, for those of you who may not have been alive in 1700s in Europe, was the notion that there are these sort of poisonous vapors. So, for example, as organic material is rotting on the street, it releases this poisonous vapor that, if you inhale it, makes you sick. So there aren't really contagious infectious diseases. Infectious or diseases aren't contagious. You're just exposed to these things. Right. So he believes that. He doesn't believe that specific germs like bacteria or viruses cause specific diseases, and that the prevention or treatment of those germs causes you to live longer. He doesn't believe that. He doesn't believe in the germ theory, which is not theoretical, okay? Specific viruses and bacteria do cause specific disease, and you can prevent them or treat them. We eliminated polio from this country with a polio vaccine. But he doesn't believe that. He really doesn't. So he has this modern day miasmas. It's not organic material rotting in the streets. It's electromagnetic radiation. It's pesticides like glyphosate. It's food additives. It's vaccines. When he says no vaccine has been beneficial, he thinks vaccines are the modern day miasma. When he went to Samoa, right at the beginning of an outbreak that ultimately caused 5,600 cases and 83 deaths in a population of only 200,000, this small Pacific Island nation. He went there with a data analyst, and he wanted to see prospectively, he assumed there would be children who would get the vaccine and children who wouldn't. He believed that those who didn't get the vaccine would be better off because they would have a lower incidence of chronic disease as compared to those who got a vaccine, because all vaccines are poison. He believes that. He believes it. He's not paid to believe it. He believes it. And that's why he is basically, as he says right now, giving infectious diseases a break. And he's just going to focus on chronic disease because the NIH has let us down by not focusing on chronic disease. He doesn't mention specifically what chronic disease he's talking about, because some chronic diseases aren't going up. I mean, actually, the incidence of cancer is going down. The incidence of heart disease is going down. I mean, obesity is going up. Type 2 diabetes is going up. Hypertension associated with obesity is going up. Asthma is going up. Fine. I mean, sure. Let's look at that. But people have looked at that. It's not like people aren't paying attention to those diseases, but not to him. So this is where he's coming from. That's what makes him so frightening. But here's my prediction. Okay, I'm going to make a prediction here, and then I'll end this rant. Okay. I don't think he lasts. I don't think he can. He's a zealot. I think politicians don't like zealots, and you're starting to see some pushback from the White House that, they don't like his communication efforts. They think he's sort of blowing it a little bit, and I think it's just the beginning of the end, because here's what's going to save us from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. One word: measles. This outbreak is much worse than people are saying. When you see that the CDC says that there's 483 cases, there's 2,000 cases, because when they say cases, they mean confirmed cases. They mean confirmed by PCR, confirmed by serology. That's the tip of a much bigger iceberg. When you start to see the number of deaths you're seeing and hospitalizations you're seeing, there's at least 2,000 cases, and the doubling time is like this. I mean, it is straight up. I think I just talked to a senior health official yesterday who said to me, there is going to be a second child death in this country, and probably soon. And I think, what's his reaction to this? What's RFK Jr.'s reaction to this massive epidemic that has already killed one child, the first child death in measles in more than 20 years? His reaction is to go on Fox, talk to Sean Hannity, and say the following things: measles vaccine kills people. Measles vaccine causes blindness and deafness. Measles vaccine causes the same symptoms of measles. That's what he says during this epidemic. He's not the right guy.
Didn't he also say that measles, it kills a certain amount of people every year, and this is just collateral? He's some to that degree, right? It happens all the time.
Yeah, we always have. Of course, we did eliminate measles from this country by the year 2000. The reason it's come back is because a critical percentage of parents are choosing not to vaccinate their children, largely because of the disinformation he and Children's Health Defense, which is his group, has been putting out for 15 years.
Well, he believes a lot of this because he has many, many medical degrees, right? How many it's got, what, like 10, 20? Or is it none? Does he have no medical degrees? Let's I want to skip ahead because you mentioned the measles. This is another piece that you wrote. This deals with the measles problem. So now I guess there's a vitamin A component to this, correct? That they're saying that a little vitamin A and you don't need to worry about the measles. And I think they're saying that there's not having the measles vaccine helps prevent cancer. This is something that the parents of the child that died said. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So how bad do you think this is going to get before something changes? A second child death, 10 child, where do you think is the breaking point?
I don't know. How many children have to die in mass shootings before we have gun control?
Oh, well, then we are fucked. A second kid's not going to matter in this case.
Yeah, the vitamin A story is interesting. So vitamin A helps with something called epithelial cell integrity. So epithelial cells are the cells that line your nose and your throat and your windpipe and your lungs, and certainly measles infects those cells. So therefore, it's important to have epithelial cell integrity. And if you're vitamin A deficient, then vitamin A, given during a measles infection, does decrease mortality if you're vitamin A deficient. So when they do studies, and there's been about 6 studies done in Africa of children who did or didn't get vitamin A when infected with measles, there clearly was an effect for giving vitamin A to decrease mortality in Africa. There have been 3 studies done in the developed world, one in England, one in Italy, one in Japan, no difference, because the incidence of vitamin A deficiency in the developed world is less than 0.5%. That's why it's never made a difference. But to him, it's a miracle. It's a miracle drug, vitamin A. So what has he done? He ships cod liver oil, which contains vitamin A, in buckets down to West Texas. But yet he's sort of very soft on vaccines. And now there's been, because of the cutbacks at HHS, there've now been clinics, measles, mumps, rubella vaccine clinics or vaccine clinics that have had to close because of the lack of funding. But vitamin A, this is a miracle, right? So what happens is people are flooding the pharmaceuticals with trying to get vitamin A. And as a consequence, they take too much because you can take too much of anything. And so they have then the consequence of so-called hypervitaminosis A, which is blurred vision, dizziness, and liver damage. So there are people on the ground who are dealing with all these children with liver damage because they think vitamin A is the way out. And he made it a binary choice. He did. By saying that vitamin A treats it. If you're a parent, you're thinking, great, vitamin. What do I want? I want a vitamin? Do I want to inject my child with 3 live weakened viruses? I'll go with the vitamin. And so this is what you get.
But it's such a surface level understanding, like, okay, vitamin A. But if you ask the average person what the fuck vitamin A does, they don't know. They're pulled towards not trusting medical establishment, big pharma. So they go, that must be bad. This must be good. It's so weird that we want this magic bullet. Do you remember Jenny McCarthy used to say like a high dairy diet cures autism? There's always been this odd pull towards ultra simplicity that just doesn't make any sense. And I think I think it's Dunning-Kruger. I think it's just, we think we know because we don't know what we don't know. But you have to be smart enough to know that you don't know.
Right, but it's attractive, right? I mean, so autism, you're probably born with autism. At least 80% of autism is genetic, and it's not a single gene like for cystic fibrosis or sickle cell disease. It's many genes, many genes, but they all have in common this notion of sort of their early developmental genes that are expressed in that first, early, second trimester during pregnancy. That's interesting. I mean, the intestinal microbiome is also seems to be maybe associated with autism. That's interesting. Certainly, maternal and paternal age are associated with autism. But see, these are things that are much less controllable. I mean, if you can just not get an MMR vaccine and now not get autism, that's much easier to do a high dairy diet or whatever. I mean, that's much more attractive. And supplements are always seen as benign, even though they're not, because anything that has a positive effect can always have a negative effect. And if it doesn't have a negative effect, it probably never had a positive effect. So, but you can see the draw.
I interviewed Dr. Nestle. I don't know. She talks about nutrition.
Marion Nestle, yeah.
Marion Nestle, yeah. She talked about how food labels lie, and she just mentioned the superfruits, the superfoods. She was like blueberries, for example. If you look at the thing, it says it helps with erectile dysfunction. But humans are horrible test subjects because you can't just lock us in a cage, feed us blueberries, and see if we get more erections than we don't. So I think the problem is it's multifactorial. People want science to be definitive, and it's just not. And I think we need to accept this. The whole COVID thing too, like, yes, there were fuck ups, but that's part of the scientific thing, man. You got to test shit and hope for the best. I don't think, what would cause somebody to go to medical school, years of training, dealing with patients just to be evil? That's a lot of effort just to be evil, isn't it?
It's a long game, playing the long game. Here's what I would say. I think you've hit on the heart of this. I don't think we've done a very good job of explaining what science is and what it isn't. I mean, it is a process in evolution. You learn as you go. I mean, right. You're perfectly willing to take a textbook and throw it over your back shoulder without a glance backwards as the information in it becomes wrong. I mean, I can tell you as a pediatric resident at Children's Hospital in Pittsburgh in the late 1970s, I was taught things that were dead wrong.
Yeah.
Like, after you feed a baby, you have to make sure that you lay the baby on the stomach so that they don't regurgitate the food down into their lungs. Bad idea. And so that's why in the early 1990s, the American Academy of Pediatrics instituted their Back to Sleep program, because clearly laying babies on the stomach increased the risk of sudden infant death syndrome. So I don't think the people who taught me that were evil. I think they just didn't know. And see what happens though is, as you know, and the COVID pandemic is a perfect example. I mean, as you learn things as you went, people went, see, they don't know what the fuck they're doing. And that's, I mean, look at the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which was February 2021 is when that vaccine was authorized. So that wasn't an mRNA vaccine. It was a so-called adenovirus vector vaccine. But it was found to very quickly be a rare cause of clotting, including severe clotting, like 1 in 250,000 people. So rare, quickly picked up, but clotting, including clotting in the brain, including fatal clotting in the brain, which ultimately drove that vaccine off the market. But people look at that and they say, here, they authorized this vaccine. They didn't know this. And now, and now we're screwed. And it's. I think if you ask people, do you think we're going to know more about science or medicine 25 years from now than we know now? I imagine everybody would say yes. But nonetheless, when it comes to your disease, or in this case, our pandemic, they think you have to know everything. When usually you make decisions based on whether you think you know enough, not whether you know everything, because you often never know everything.
Yeah. Well, the problem is I think humans are, we're tribal, we're binary, and we're absolutists. So we can't, there's the gray middle isn't sexy, and it's getting worse and worse. I think media is clickbaity. You can't go, listen, the truth is in the gray middle. It's not probably what you think. It's probably not what they think. It's probably way down, but that's not going to get you excited and arguing with strangers on the internet. So it's just not how we approach anything. Now,
Right.
Speaking of food, let's talk about tuna fish sandwiches, because that was one of the tuna fish thing was a fascinating part of this article that you wrote. So this goes, like I said, this article is from 2023. You and RFK Jr. go way back. You mentioned that this guy called you. You were excited because you were a big fan of his father. You had read his book, and you came off the call thinking that it went relatively well. Then he buries you in Rolling Stone and proceeds to go on Rogan years later and bury you some more. What happened?
So he called me in 2004 and said that there were people who, RFK Jr. called me and said there were people who were coming into his office who were worried about this preservative that was in vaccines, was out of vaccines by 2004, at least for children, young children. And was it harmful? Because certainly mercury can be harmful. I mean, mercury at high doses can cause neurological damage and tics and motor problems and other things. I mean, certainly there have been instances, for example, the Minamata Bay disaster, where mercury was sort of dumped in by a company into the bay and then caused, sort of fetal birth defects and problems even after birth. And then the Iraqi fumigated grain disaster. Again, so mercury is never going to sound good. It's not like there's a National Center for the Appreciation of Heavy Metals standing up in defense of mercury. So here was ethyl mercury, which has a much shorter half-life than methyl mercury. And it's not, methyl mercury is an environmental problem, but not. Ethyl mercury is a synthetic product, and it's eliminated from the body much more quickly. So you're assuming you live on this planet and you drink anything made from water on this planet, including breast milk or infant formula, you're exposed to far more mercury just living on this planet, because mercury is the nearest crust, than you're ever going to get from vaccines. And so I went through all that with him. Also, by that time, there had been a number of studies that had already been done. I mean, Western Europe took mercury out of vaccines or as a preservative in the early 90s. There were Canadian provinces that used mercury-containing vaccines right next to provinces that used the same vaccines that didn't contain mercury. So it was easy to do these studies. And the answer was just what you would expect, given that you can't tell whether somebody's been inoculated with a mercury-containing vaccine because you already have mercury in your circulation, assuming you live on this planet. So I went through all that. I thought it was a great conversation. I went home to my wife that night and said, that's it. We are going to be throwing that football around at Hyannisport soon. We're now in. We're going to be at that Kennedy compound. Then, like in July of 2005, he published an article in Rolling Stone called Deadly Immunity, where he trashed me. He said, of course I would say that. He says, I called the CDC. They asked me who to call. They said, call this Paul Offit guy. And I called to him and he lied to my face. And why? Because the vaccine he's working on, and it hadn't been a vaccine yet. Our vaccine wasn't a vaccine until 2006, is laced with thimerosal, laced with this ethyl mercury containing preservative, which first of all wasn't true. No live attenuated viral vaccines contain a preservative. But, and he had all the numbers wrong about the amount of ethyl mercury there was in the vaccine. So I called Rolling Stone and I said, this is all wrong. I mean, and ultimately they retracted it, and Salon.com retracted it. But I became part of his stump speech, not just in Rogan. Whenever he would go to any sort of major event, he would always say that story, the CDC asked me to call, I called Paul. He lied to my face, and I taped that interview. Great, release the tape. Love to hear it. Please release that tape, because that's not the way I remember that conversation.
And he hasn't released the tape. Yet he just has talking points.
One of my Substacks, I called on him to release the tape. He hasn't released the tape.
Is there I know you don't read the comments and you shouldn't. As a matter of fact, I just drove down to DC. My parents live down there to see a concert with them. And on the way down, I listened to Howard Stern, which I haven't done in years, but he was talking about YouTube clips and how they would bash him in the comments underneath. And he's at 71 and it affects him. So I totally understand, never read the comments, but part of this recurring theme in these comments is, why won't you debate RFK Jr.? Has that ever been on the table? Would it matter? I don't know. Where do you stand on that?
So I've been offered to do that a few times, actually. There were people who, when I would go to an ACIP meeting, there were people who would advise the Committee for Immunization Practice who would come up representing him. And at one point, I was offered $50,000 to debate him. And I think on Rogan once it came up. But in any case, first of all, it's not a debate. You can debate the interpretation of facts. You can, and I think scientists do that all the time. I mean, when I would go to these double-stranded RNA meetings, and you can only imagine the parties that are associated with the meeting that has a name like that. But, we would debate. You'd present your data, you reach a certain conclusion. Can you fairly reach that conclusion based on those data? That's the way science works, and it works well. And you want people to criticize you because that's the only way your science gets better. But he just says things that are just flat out wrong. So for example, he'll say regarding on the mercury thing, he'll say, you should look at the Burbacker paper, he said, out of the University of Washington. Burbacker injected, monkeys, baby monkeys with this thimerosal, this ethyl mercury containing preservative. And what they found was inflammation like they'd never seen before, just the worst inflammation in the brain. Read the paper. It doesn't say that at all. It says that there was no effect of ethyl mercury. Methyl mercury at high levels was a problem, but not ethyl mercury. So he lies. So what you're doing is you're sitting there, he's saying these things and you're saying, well, that's just not true. That's not true. That's not true. It's not a debate. I don't see how that helps anybody.
No, I agree. Although 50 grand, that's a lot of money.
Well, actually, the person who asked me said, would you be willing to debate RFK? I said, I would love to debate RFK, but he's been dead for 50 years.
Yeah, that'd be a problem. The ingredient that they took out, that you mentioned, why they take it out?
Right. So there were in 2001, there were more and more vaccines were being given to children, and so therefore more and more vaccines contained this ethyl mercury containing preservative, and there were studies even done at that point that showed you that it was not a problem. But again, mercury doesn't sound good, so the Public Health Service showed basically how not to communicate theoretical risk. This was a great example of how not to communicate theoretical risk. So they basically put a gun to the head of the pharmaceutical companies and said, you got to take this preservative out, which basically meant you went from multi-dose vials to single-dose vials, which made vaccines much more expensive and made them basically unaffordable to a number of developing world countries. It was a terrible, terrible event. And it gave birth to anti-vaccine groups like Moms Against Mercury and Generation Rescue were born of this episode. So there was a piece put out by the American Academy of Pediatrics that said it all. They said, all the evidence to date is that ethyl mercury at the level contained in vaccines is safe, but to make it even safer, we're going to take it out. Well, if it's safe, then taking it out doesn't make it safer. It just makes it perceived to be safer, which is not the same thing. I think that was a terrible episode. And I was actually on the ACIP at that time. And I watched this all play out, and it was just a nightmare the way they did this. It was like they took this, the Public Health Service took this issue hostage instead of doing what they should have done, which is just do what I just did to you. Mercury's in the Earth's crust. It's in an inorganic form. It comes to the surface. It's methylated, meaning it's made organic, which means it can now cross cell membranes. We are exposed to methyl mercury all the time. Assuming you breastfeed your child, assuming you give infant formula, assuming you give anything made from water on this planet, your child will ingest methyl mercury, which will end up in the bloodstream. But it's safe, just like all the other heavy metals like cadmium or beryllium or thallium is in our bloodstream, but at levels that are safe. Meaning the dose makes the poison, as Paracelsus said in the 1600s. Say that, but they didn't. They just took it out, scared people, and gave birth to groups like Moms Against Mercury, which didn't really scare me, but it was going to scare me if they became Mafia Moms Against Mercury. If there was Mafia Moms Against Mercury, I was out.
They were out. This is the thing. Simplistic. Mercury, bad. Big Pharma, bad. We are very simple creatures. And that's,
I had this. I once in front of a congressional hearing. I think it may have been Frank Pallone, but it was a Democrat from New Jersey who stood up and proudly said, "When it comes to mercury, I have zero tolerance. But if zero tolerance, got to move to another planet because
I'm anti-Earth." All right, this is one more, which I thought was a very interesting spin on this, which is that anti-vaccine activism hurts children with autism. Part of it you said is if a family has a child who has autism, they stop vaccinating subsequent children. That was part of this too. That's a fascinating spin that I've never heard. But can you talk about how anti-vaccine activism hurts children with autism?
No, they've taken the autism story hostage. They've made it their own. The reason you should be anti-vaccine is because vaccines cause autism. Well, I mean, there's a woman in New York whose name is Allison Singer, who heads a group called the Autism Science Foundation. And I give her all the credit in the world. What she does is she gets money into her group, which she then gives as grants for people to study autism and look at things like the genetics of autism. Look at things like the intestinal microbiome. Look at things like the relationship between maternal and paternal age and autism. And she's the mother of a child. Her eldest child has autism, and she does that knowing that all the work she's doing has no chance of helping her daughter. And I really give her all the credit in the world for that. And I wish she was on TV more, because when it comes to like things like autism, they have people like me on TV. What do I know? I mean, all I can do is say it's not vaccines, but she's the one who really has a great sense of the cause or causes of autism. And I think it's unfair to children with autism because children with autism are less likely to be vaccinated as a consequence, and their younger healthy sibs are also less likely to be vaccinated, which only increases the risk of vaccine preventable disease and doesn't in any sense decrease the risk of autism, certainly in a healthy younger child. So it's just been hard to watch all this. I mean, these people, these anti-vaccine people, believe they're helping children with autism when all they're doing is hurting them.
That's such an interesting point. I want to go back to this because I know like I'm harping on the comments a lot, but only because you're attacked so viciously all the time. And it fascinates me. I was up all night reading them, but in this, and yet it still moves. The first comment is written by a doctor in Massachusetts, actually, where I live. And he goes, "You're not Galileo. RFK is Galileo because he's going against the establishment and you're not going, but the establishment, first of all, it moves. And second of all, I feel that's generally crazy, but I just guess in terms of how you can spin things in any particular direction, they do, and they have, and they'll continue to do so. You're at the forefront of this fight. You're out there. You talk all the time on this subject. Are you exhausted by this? I mean, this war?
No. And I'd like to sort of claim a higher moral ground here and say, truthfully, that it is hard for me to watch children come into our hospital whose parents have chosen not to vaccinate them, and then you watch them suffer and occasionally die of a vaccine preventable disease. And I've certainly seen that. But what motivates me is I hate these people. I hate these anti-vaccine activists for the most part. I think that they're sort of politically connected. They're lawyer-backed. I mean, it's like it's like big anti-vax. I mean, there's a lot of money in this. There's about $1 billion a year that's made off sort of the anti-vaccine activity online. I mean, you look at groups like Children's Health Defense or Informed Consent Action Network. They get tens of millions of dollars, in contributions every year. These people, RFK Jr. was making $500,000 a year by doing this. It's a business. It is a business. It's not as big as Big Pharma, but it is a business. And I don't like them. I think they lie. I think they put children in harm's way. And I think my drive for children is because I was in a polio ward when I was 5, and I guess I always see myself as a protector of children at some level. I mean, that was a scarring event. And I think the scars of our childhood invariably become the passions of our adulthood. And that's my passion. I think they're evil. I think they hurt people. I'm very sympathetic to parents who are concerned about vaccines because I understand that. I mean, we ask a lot of parents in this country. We ask them to give vaccines to prevent 14 different diseases in the first few years of life. That can mean as many as 25 inoculations during that time. It can mean as many as 5 shots at one time to prevent diseases most people don't see, using biological fluids most people don't understand. I think it'd be surprising if people didn't push back on vaccines. I'm sympathetic to that. What I'm not sympathetic about is the lying. And promoting things like, chelation therapy or Lupron or hyperbaric oxygen chambers to treat. I just think it's a shady business and it hurts children. And so that's what motivates me. I'm really, in many ways, more motivated out of hate. And so I'm glad I'm getting on their nerves.
This whole time I was like, oh, it's just the altruism. But I like that you're also fueled by hate, which should push you further when you combine the two.
Yeah, probably not to my detriment. I mean, or to my detriment. I mean, because my children have been targeted by one caller, which, and when that happened, I went back to my wife and I said, tell me to stop and I'll stop. But because I think at least there is a segment. I'm not talking about parents who are hesitant about vaccines. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the professionals, the Barbara Fishers, the Del Bigtrees, the Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s, the Mary Hollands. I'm talking about the pros who do this for a living. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about parents who are concerned about vaccines. Parents should be concerned about vaccines because you're inoculating healthy children with them, and it's a biological agent. I mean, ask questions, fair enough, but I'm talking about the pros. That's who I hate.
Yeah, the parents make sense. I mean, it's a high stakes game. Your child should be the thing you care most about. And then we're talking about their health, and that's kind of a freaky thing, but oh boy. All right. Well, listen, I don't want to keep you. I know you have, you got to get off, but tell me there's hope. I know that. So you think RFK might not last. Do you think the next guy is going to be as crazy? Do you think it's going to level out? Like, I think with this administration and this time and space, anything's on the table, but I guess, is there hope?
Yes. No, I think the thing that we have on our side is science. I mean, I think good science does win out in the end. despite the Roman Catholics' edict against teaching that the earth revolved around the sun, they were wrong. I think good science stands up over time. The fact is vaccines don't cause autism. The fact is polio vaccine doesn't kill more people than it saves. I just think that it's a troubled time right now, and vaccines have become a dirty word. And I think that somebody said to me the other day, and I think he's right. He said, realize you're not the establishment anymore. You're not. You're on the outside looking in. And that's true. I mean, anti-vaccine activism isn't just scaring people. It's making policy now. That's where we're at.
You're counterculture now. Who'd have thunk?
Right. Exactly.
Well, Dr. Offit, thank you. Thank you for what you do. I hope you win out. This is sort of like, I wasn't a Superman reader, but I think at some point Lex Luthor became president and Superman must have been like, what the fuck is going on? I think this is your position, right? How did your Lex Luthor get elected? Not president in this case, but he has all the power in your area of expertise. Oh my God, what happened?